The silk of the dress was a lie. It whispered against her skin, a crimson promise of elegance and power she did not possess. From across the ballroom, under the weight of 1,000 crystals dripping light from the ceiling, Sloane felt her husband's gaze. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was an inventory. Preston Collier III was assessing his latest, and perhaps most beautiful, acquisition. At 18, she was also his most volatile. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that coated the back of her throat. The low hum of conversation, punctuated by the clink of champagne flutes, was a language she had yet to master. She was a prop in this gilded cage, and tonight, the prop was malfunctioning. She had spoken to the Japanese delegation for 5 minutes longer than Preston had deemed appropriate. She had laughed at a joke told by a rival CEO. She had, for a few precious moments, forgotten her place. He moved toward her now, a shark gliding through placid waters. His smile was a perfect, predatory slash of white in his tanned face. He was handsome in the way a marble statue is handsome, flawless, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. He placed a heavy hand on the small of her back, his fingers digging into her flesh through the thin silk. A warning. "Having a good time, darling?" His voice was smooth, a layer of honey over steel. "The orchestra is lovely," she said, her own voice a carefully constructed melody of polite indifference. She kept her eyes fixed on a point over his shoulder, a blur of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. "You seem to have made an impression on Mr. Tanaka," Preston said, his thumb pressing a hard circle into her spine. "He barely took his eyes off you." Sloane risked a glance toward the alcove, where the Japanese investors were gathered. One man stood slightly apart from the others. He wasn't the loudest or the most animated. He was simply still. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of charcoal gray, so dark it was almost black. He held a glass of what looked like whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He wasn't looking at her now, but she had felt his gaze earlier. It was different from the others. Not hungry or lecherous, but analytical. It was the kind of look one gives a complex puzzle, searching for the key to its solution. The only break in his severe composure was the flash of intricate, colorful ink that crept just beyond his starched white cuff, the tail of a dragon, perhaps, coiling around his wrist. "He was just being polite," Sloane murmured, trying to ease away from Preston's grip. "Was he?" Preston's smile tightened. "Or were you being inviting? You know, for a girl from nothing, you certainly learned how to work a room. I have to wonder what other lessons you've been taking behind my back." The accusation, whispered for her ears only, was a slap. Her breath hitched. "That's not fair, Preston." "Fair?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Fair is what I provide for you. This dress, this party, this entire life you seem so eager to cheapen." He tightened his grip, pulling her flush against him. "Let's give our audience a little show. Remind them who you belong to." Before she could react, he signaled a passing waiter, plucking a full glass of red wine from the silver tray. He held it up, a dark ruby jewel in the light. "A toast," he said, his voice now loud enough for those nearby to hear. "To my beautiful, spirited wife." He turned the glass, and with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, emptied its contents down the front of her crimson gown. The wine, dark as blood, soaked into the silk, leaving a grotesque, spreading stain. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The music seemed to falter. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom went silent, all eyes on them. The cold liquid seeped through the fabric, chilling her skin. But it was the heat of humiliation that burned her, a fire crawling up her neck and flooding her cheeks. Preston leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. His breath was sour with champagne. "Now you match," he whispered, his voice a venomous caress. "Beautiful on the outside, spoiled within. You broke my trust. I thought I'd break a little piece of you in return." Something inside her, a cord that had been stretched taut for months, finally snapped. The polite smile, the demure posture, the carefully curated obedience, it all fell away. She looked at his smug, handsome face, and she felt nothing but a vast, empty coldness. He hadn't broken a piece of her. He had incinerated the whole thing. Without a word, Sloane pushed away from him. The force was small, but it was so unexpected that he stumbled back a step. She turned her back on him, on the shocked faces of the city's elite, on the whispering and the pointing fingers. She walked. Her steps were even and measured, her spine ramrod straight. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply moved toward the grand marble staircase, each click of her heels on the polished floor a declaration of war. She was aware of the silence she left in her wake, a vacuum where the party used to be. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her ruined dress, on her resolute back. She did not look back. Not once. She did not see Preston's face twist from smug satisfaction to livid fury. And she did not see the man in the charcoal suit, Ryoichi Tanaka, set his untouched glass of whiskey down on a tray. She didn't see him watch her walk away, his dark eyes missing nothing. Not the tremor in her hands, not the defiant set of her shoulders, not the quiet, terrifying strength in her retreat. He saw a woman who had just been publicly executed, and yet walked away from her own grave as if she were ascending a throne. The cool night air was a balm on her burning skin as she pushed through the heavy oak doors of the venue. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, were a welcome return to reality. She had nothing. No purse, no phone, no keys. Just the ruined dress and the sudden, terrifying freedom of a person with absolutely nothing left to lose. She walked down the stone steps, her destination unknown. Home was not an option. A hotel was impossible. She would just walk until her feet bled, until the city swallowed her whole. A long, black car, sleek and silent as a panther, pulled up to the curb beside her. The window slid down with a faint hiss. Inside, cloaked in shadow, was the man from the alcove, Ryoichi Tanaka. "You are going the wrong way," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and certain. It was not a question. Sloane stopped, turning to face him. "I don't think that's any of your business. Your husband is a man who dislikes being embarrassed," he stated, his gaze direct. "His men will be out here in moments. They will not be gentle." A shiver of genuine fear, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine. He was right. Preston's rage would be monumental. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tight. "Get in the car, Sloane," he said. He knew her name. Of course he did. The sound of it on his lips was different. Not the cloying endearment Preston used, or the formal title others employed. He said it like a fact, like a destination. She hesitated for only a second. Behind her was the gilded cage, its door now barred with violence and fury. In front of her was a dark car and a man who moved with the quiet lethality of a predator. She was trading one cage for another, she knew. But this one, at least, was a mystery. She opened the door and slid into the buttery leather seat. The door closed behind her with a solid, final thud, sealing her in with the scent of cedar and smoke and the unnerving stillness of the man who had seen everything. The car pulled silently away from the curb, melting into the river of city lights, just as two of Preston's bulky security men burst from the ballroom doors, their eyes scanning the empty street in frustration. The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles, the city lights a sprawling galaxy below. The decor was minimalist, a study in black, gray, and wood, with clean lines and an almost monastic severity. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets. The only art was a single, large canvas of a raging sea, painted in violent strokes of indigo and white. It was beautiful and terrifying. Ryoichi led her into the vast living space and gestured toward a low sofa. "Seat." A woman in a simple black dress appeared as if from nowhere, offering Sloane a glass of water and a thick cashmere blanket. Sloane took them, her hands still trembling slightly. The woman bowed and vanished as silently as she had arrived. Ryoichi stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city he seemed to own. "Preston Collier is a small man with a large appetite," he said, his voice calm. "He deals in commodities. Technology, real estate, people. He believes you are one of his assets. Sloane wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, the soft wool a small comfort. I was, she corrected, her voice quiet but firm. I'm not anymore. He turned, his dark eyes pinning her in place. An asset doesn't just walk away. It is reacquired or it is liquidated. He will not let you go. To him, this is not a matter of the heart. It is a matter of accounting. So, what is this? Sloane asked, gesturing around the sterile, luxurious room. Are you liquidating me for him? Or acquiring me for yourself? A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even respect, crossed his features. Neither, he said. I am observing a variable. Your husband and I have a business arrangement. Your public departure has complicated that arrangement. It has shown him to be a man who cannot control his own house. Such a man is unreliable, unpredictable. So, I'm leverage, she stated flatly. You are a complication, he corrected. For him. And now, for me. He walked over to a polished sideboard and poured himself another whiskey. He will look for you. He will use all his resources. The police will not help you. He owns half the force in this city. Sloane knew it was true. Preston's influence was like a web, invisible but everywhere. She had a choice. She could leave this strange, cold man's protection and face Preston's wrath alone, or she could stay in this new, more elegant cage. Why help me? She asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. What do you get out of it? Ryoichi took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. I dislike messy accounting, he said. And I had a younger sister once. She was fragile. She bent until she broke. You, he paused, his gaze dropping to the dark stain on her dress, did not bend. You did not break. You simply walked away. I find that interesting. That was it. The first crack in his marble facade. A sister. A wound. A memory of a woman he had failed to protect. He saw in Sloane's defiance a chance to rewrite a history that haunted him. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet tension. Ryoichi was a ghost in his own home, present one moment, gone the next. He gave her a suite of rooms, clothes that appeared in the closet without explanation, and food that was left outside her door. He gave her space, but not freedom. His men were everywhere, silent sentinels in dark suits. The danger escalated on the third day. Ryoichi insisted she accompany him somewhere. He didn't explain why. They were in the underground garage, walking toward the black car when it happened. Two vans screeched around the corner, blocking their exit. Men in ski masks, armed with bats and pipes, poured out. Preston's men. Crude, brutal, and effective. Ryoichi's reaction was instantaneous. He shoved her behind him, his body a solid shield. Stay down, he commanded, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. He moved with a dancer's grace and a predator's economy. It wasn't a brawl, it was a surgical procedure. A block, a strike to the throat, an elbow to a jaw. A swift, disabling move that left a man groaning on the concrete. He moved through the violence like it was his native language, every action precise and final. One of the men broke past him, lunging for Sloane. She didn't scream. She reacted. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with all her might, catching the man squarely in the knee. He howled and crumpled to the ground. Ryoichi dispatched the last man and turned to her. His eyes scanned her, checking for injury. There was a thin, bleeding cut on her arm where a shattered piece of concrete had grazed her. He saw it, and his jaw tightened. He grabbed her by the uninjured arm and pulled her into the car, his own men suddenly materializing to deal with the aftermath. Back in the penthouse, he pushed her into a chair in the main room. He returned with a first aid kit, his movements still clipped and angry. He knelt before her, dabbing at the cut with an antiseptic wipe. The sting was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the electric jolt of his touch. His large, calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle against her skin. She could see the dragon's head of his tattoo now, its eye a malevolent sapphire on the back of his hand. He worked in silence, his focus absolute. The air between them was thick with unspoken things. The adrenaline of the fight, the stark reality of her situation, the undeniable fact that he had protected her. And she, in her own small way, had fought back. When he finished applying the bandage, his hand lingered on her arm. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. The silence stretched, becoming a physical presence in the room. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He raised his other hand, slowly, as if not trusting himself. His fingers brushed a stray curl from her cheek, his touch feather-light. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. It wasn't a caress. It was a claim, a silent, possessive gesture that sent a shiver through her entire body. "He will not touch you again," Ryoichi said, his voice a low growl. It was not a promise. It was a vow. That was the moment she could have run. He had shown her the violence of his world. She could have thanked him and asked to be taken to a bus station, to disappear into the anonymity of the country. But she looked into his unyielding eyes and saw a more certain safety than any police force could offer. She thought of Preston's casual cruelty, his belief that he owned her soul. She looked at Ryoichi, a man who dealt in death, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an asset. She felt seen. She made a deliberate choice. She did not pull away from his touch. She held his gaze. She stayed. The war between them, the unspoken one, was tested a week later. Ryoichi had been gone for 2 days. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than usual. Sloane found herself pacing, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She told herself it was fear of Preston, but a deeper, more honest part of her knew it was fear for Ryoichi. He returned just after midnight, letting himself into the apartment like a shadow. There was a new rigidity in his posture, a darkness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He walked past her without a word, heading straight for his office. Curiosity, or perhaps a foolish sense of concern, made her follow. The door was ajar. She saw him standing over his desk, looking at a file. On the desk next to the file was a gun, a sleek, black pistol he was methodically cleaning. "Preston Collier does not simply trade in technology," Ryoichi said without turning around. He knew she was there. "He trades in people. Young women mostly. Girls from backgrounds like yours. Poor, ambitious, with no one to look for them if they disappear. He promises them modeling contracts, a new life. He sells them to men with specific tastes. Men in my world." The blood drained from Sloane's face. The pieces clicked into place. Preston's obsessive control, his possessiveness, his casual cruelty. It wasn't just the ego of a rich man. It was the behavior of a trafficker. She had not been his wife. She had been his prize inventory, kept on public display. "He intended to sell you," Ryoichi continued, his voice dangerously soft, "to a rival of mine, a man from Osaka. The deal was to be finalized next month. Your little performance at the gala, it ruined the transaction. It made the merchandise look defective." Sloane felt a wave of nausea, so profound, she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. The humiliation, the whine, the whispers, it all made a new, horrific kind of sense. She did something then that she couldn't uncross. She stepped into the room. "He has a ledger," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "A private one. Not on any of his computers. It's a physical book, bound in green leather. He keeps it in a floor safe behind the Monet in his study. The combination is my birthday." Ryoichi finally turned to look at her. The cold fury in his eyes was terrifying, but none of it was directed at her. It was the look of a man who had just been handed the perfect weapon. By giving him that information, she was no longer just a victim seeking refuge. She was an accomplice. She was signing Preston's death warrant. She had crossed a line, and she did not regret it. The tension between them shifted. It was no longer just about protection. It was a partnership, forged in shared purpose. She caught herself watching him, the way he moved, the way his focus narrowed when he was on the phone, speaking in rapid, hushed Japanese. He caught her watching more than once. A long, assessing look would pass between them, an acknowledgement of the current pulling them closer. The night his men retrieved the ledger, he found her on the balcony, staring at the unblinking city lights. He came to stand beside her, the scent of cedar and cold night air clinging to him. "It is done," he said. "The information you provided, it will dismantle his entire operation. And it will ruin the men who are his clients." "Good," she said, the word feeling small and inadequate for the righteous anger burning in her chest. They stood in silence for a long time, the sounds of the city a distant hum below. "I told myself that keeping you here was a tactical decision," he said, his voice quiet, almost raw. "A way to control a variable in my war with my rivals. I was lying to myself." Sloane turned her head to look at him. His profile was carved from granite, stark and unyielding against the city skyline. "Why then?" she whispered. He met her gaze, his eyes black pools of intensity. "Because watching you walk away from that man, with nothing but your own dignity, it reminded me of something I thought I had lost. Honor is not about saving the fragile. It is about recognizing strength." It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous, more honest. It was a confession of a fundamental shift in his world. She had become his new true north. Preston, cornered and desperate, made his final move. He couldn't get to Sloane physically, not with Ryoichi's men surrounding the building. So he attacked her reputation. He leaked a story to the tabloids, complete with falsified documents and paid witnesses, painting her as a mentally unstable gold digger who had tried to extort him before vanishing with a known criminal. Her face was everywhere, her name dragged through the mud. He was destroying her old life, salting the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. He was making sure that even if she left Ryoichi, she had no world to return to. The move was designed to isolate her, to make her completely dependent on the very man he wanted to destroy. He was targeting her to unmake him. The climax was not a grand battle in a warehouse or a high-speed chase. It was quiet, personal, and far more brutal. Ryoichi located the safe house where Preston was hiding, a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. He went alone. He told Sloane to stay, to lock the doors. She waited for an hour, then 2. The silence in the penthouse became a screaming void. She couldn't stand it. Taking one of the cars from the garage, a simple sedan she knew how to drive, she went after him. She wasn't a soldier. She had no weapon. She just knew she could not sit and wait for a world to be decided for her. She found the brownstone. The front door was splintered, hanging off its hinges. Inside, the house was a wreck. Furniture was overturned, lamps shattered. In the living room, Preston stood over a kneeling Ryoichi. 2 of Preston's men lay dead or unconscious nearby. Ryoichi was injured, a dark stain spreading on his white shirt near his shoulder, his breathing labored. Preston held a gun, not pointed at Ryoichi, but at his own temple. "You see?" Preston said, his voice high and manic. "You've taken everything. My business. My reputation. But you won't get the satisfaction of killing me, Tanaka. And when I'm gone, she'll be wanted for my murder. I've left a very detailed note. The unstable wife and her gangster lover. They'll hunt her forever." He was smiling, a broken, triumphant look on his face. He had found a way to win, even in death. Sloane stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. "No, he won't," she said. Preston's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with shock. "You," he spat. "You always underestimated me, Preston," Sloane said, her voice steady, betraying none of the terror that was making her heart hammer against her ribs. "You thought I was just a pretty thing to hang on your arm. You never bothered to learn anything about me." She took a step forward. "You taught me so much, though. You taught me about leverage, about finding a weakness and pressing on it until something breaks." She looked past him, at Ryoichi. He was watching her, his dark eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. He was trusting her. "Your father," Sloane said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate and cruel, just like Preston had taught her. "He never approved of you, did he? Always thought you were too soft. Too concerned with appearances. He told me once, at a dinner party you were too drunk to remember, that your greatest accomplishment was marrying me. Something beautiful to distract from the rot inside." Preston's face contorted in a mask of rage and pain. "Shut up," he hissed. "He would be so disappointed to see you now," Sloane continued, relentless, taking the coward's way out. "Proving him right after all this time. You're not a shark, Preston. You're just a spoiled little boy who broke his favorite toy and now wants to set the whole nursery on fire." That was it. The final push. His self-pity, his rage, his daddy issues, it all crested in one wave. With a guttural scream, he turned the gun from his own head and pointed it at her. It was the opening Ryoichi needed. In a blur of motion, he surged upward, ignoring his injury. He didn't go for the gun. He drove the heel of his hand into Preston's nose. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Preston staggered back, disoriented, the gun firing wildly into the ceiling. Ryoichi disarmed him in a single, fluid motion, bringing him to his knees with a joint lock that made him shriek in agony. Sloane didn't flinch. She just watched, her breathing evening out. She had faced him down. She had used the wounds he gave her as a weapon against him. She had saved Ryoichi not with a gun, but with the truth. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage, Ryoichi finally released Preston, who crumpled to the floor, sobbing. He walked over to Sloane, his steps measured, despite his injury. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the pain etched on his face, but also something else. Something new. He reached out, his uninjured hand coming up to cup her face. His thumb gently stroked her cheek. He said her name, Sloane, and the way it sounded held the weight of a final, irrevocable choice. "In my world," he said, his voice low and raspy, "debts are paid in blood. But you are not a debt to be paid. You are a claim to be honored." Her old life was gone, reduced to ash and tabloid headlines. The cost of her freedom was an exile into his world of shadows and silent violence. For him, the cost was the fortress around his heart, breached and rebuilt with her at its center. Later, standing on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights seemed different. Not a galaxy of possibilities, but a territory. His territory. Theirs. Ryoichi came to stand behind her, his presence a warm, solid wall at her back. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his gaze on her, a silent acknowledgement of all that had passed between them. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, at the woman staring back. The girl in the red dress was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, clearer, and infinitely stronger. The cage had shattered, and in its place a throne.